Anastasia Chatzka. I'm a fashion designer, pattern maker, and sewing educator, and I'm so happy you're here sewing along with me today. Welcome to Sewing Anastasia, and today we are going to make a super cute, simple gathered skirt. And if you're new to sewing, this project is perfect for you because it is so simple and you get a super cute skirt. And if you're an advanced sewer, well, this project is just fun. This is a great starter project that you can make in under an hour and then wear it out the door. It is so gratifying to make something and wear it and then get compliments on it. It is the best feeling ever. So you are going to love this cute little gathered skirt. If you're not already a subscriber to Sewing Anastasia, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you know when all the new videos come out. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much for watching. And don't forget, I now teach sewing classes in my design studio here in Chicago, Illinois, and I also teach them virtually, so make sure you check those out at sewinganastasia.com. Supplies for this project are super simple. You're going to need about a yard and a half of fabric, depending on how gathered you want it. You're going to need some matching thread. Whoop, there goes the thread. You're going to need some elastic. I'm going to be using elastic that's 1.5 inches wide. You could use 2-inch wide. You could use 1/2 inch wide. You could use all different widths of elastic for this. So go ahead and choose your width of elastic and make sure it's going to fit around your waist. And then you're also going to need your scissors. So the first thing we need to do is cut our fabric. So you need to decide how long do you want your skirt, and you need to figure out how wide to make it. So a rule of thumb with this is making it 1.5 times your waist measurement. But if you want a super gathered skirt, obviously you can do 2 or 3 times your waist measurement. Today I'm going to be doing 1.5 times my waist measurement. And that gives me a piece of fabric about this big. So I decided to make the length of my skirt 16 inches. But we have to also add seam allowance for the hem, and we have to add extra fabric for the casing for the elastic. So since my elastic is 1.5 inches wide, I need to add 1.5 inches plus 1/2 inch for seam allowance. So that means I'm going to be adding an extra 1.5 inches plus 1/2 inch, so that's 2 inches plus 1/2 inch at the hem. So I'm also adding an extra 2.5 inches to my 16 inches. Giving me 18.5 inches for length. And then for the width of my fabric, I did 1.5 times my waist, and that's how I ended up with this rectangle of fabric right here. And believe it or not, this is gonna make the cutest skirt. The next step is finishing the edges of this giant rectangle. So I serged my edges, and if you don't have a serger, you could use a zigzag stitch, you could use an overcast stitch, you could use an overlap stitch. There's so many different options for choosing how to finish the edge of the fabric. Now you want to finish the edge of the fabric so that way it doesn't fray and unravel on you when you're wearing it. You could also pink your seams, you could bias bind your seams. There are so many different ways to finish the edges on this skirt. But the easiest thing to do is either serge it or zigzag it. So go ahead and finish all the edges around your skirt. Next, we need to cut our elastic. So take the elastic that you bought and place it around your waist and pull it as tight as you would like it. Make sure it's comfortable on you, but if you want it on your natural waist, make sure it's sitting on your natural waist. If you want your skirt to be lower on your hips because you're doing that new trend of the open midriff, then go ahead and put it at your hips and make the elastic comfortable. And then just go ahead and cut it. And so we're gonna end up with a piece of elastic for our waist. The next thing we need to do is create a fold to put the elastic in, which is called a casing. So we are going to iron down a casing that is big enough to fit our elastic into. And the really important part to remember when doing this is not to make it too big or too small. It's gotta be just right. So this is the edge of my fabric, and I'm going to be using this edge here for the casing, and I just left my selvage here so I didn't serge this edge. And I need to make the casing as big as this elastic plus seam allowance. So an easy way to do this without a ruler is to fold it over the elastic and feel it and make sure you have your 1/2 inch seam allowance right there. And then you could pull it out, and then you would know your casing needs to be this big, and then you can iron it down. Or grab your seam gauge, measure your elastic plus 1/2 inch, find that on your fabric, and then go ahead and fold it over. So there's no exact measurement to this because you might have a different width of elastic than I have right now. So you just want to make sure that you have about 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 inch of room for the elastic to move. and then you have your 1/2 inch down here for your seam allowance. And if you do, you're all good. And then you can iron down the casing. So we're basically creating this flap of fabric right now that we're going to be putting the elastic into later. So right now, this is just ironing. So I'm just gonna move my skirt down and work my way all the way down the width of the skirt. Okay. Now that we have our casing all prepped, it's time to head over to the sewing machine and sew this skirt together. We are almost done. Can you believe it? So now we need to sew these 2 edges together, the short edges, basically what would be the length of your skirt. But before you do that, make sure you open up this fold that we just ironed. So you need to open up that fold and you're gonna sew end to end. And we're gonna sew up a 1/2 inch seam. So you're gonna sew a 1/2 inch away from the very edge of the fabric. Don't forget to back stitch at the beginning of your seam. And work your way all the way down, making sure that your edges are nice and lined up. Back stitch at the end and cut your threads. So now you can see that we have our seam from the top of the waist all the way down to the bottom of the skirt. So now you can see that we have a circle that we can fit into. And now we gotta get that elastic into the top of the skirt. Now what we need to do is create the casing for the elastic. So because we already have the crease in the fabric for the casing, all we need to do is flip it down to the inside. And you want to make sure that your seam allowance is pushed one direction, that you've ironed it one way. Doesn't matter which way, it just needs to be one way. So for this project, do not iron your seam allowance open. It's always a great idea to iron it open for other projects, but for this one, it's best to iron it one direction. So now what we're going to do is measure up our 1/2 inch from the edge of our piece of fabric that's folded over, and we're going to stitch down. So we're going to be stitching all the way around in a circle, but don't finish the circle. You want to leave about 1 inch and a half opening, and I like to leave it somewhere right around the seam. And that opening is going to be where I insert the elastic for the waist. Let's sew it down. So I have my straight stitch on, and I'm going to be lining up my stitch so that way it's about a 1/2 inch away from the edge of the fabric. I'm going to back stitch just a couple, and then continue all the way around. If you wanted, you could pin this, but I have a nice crisp fold in mind, so I'm just gonna hold it nice and flat as I go. So don't forget to leave your opening. I'm gonna leave my opening about 1.5 inches big, do a couple back stitches and cut. Let's take a look at our casing and I'll show you how to put that elastic in. So you can see I have that stitch going all the way around my skirt and I left my opening right here. So now we're gonna put our elastic in. So to put our elastic through the casing, we can either use a safety pin or we can use this cool thing called a bodkin. So I'm going to use the bodkin. So you're going to clamp it onto your elastic and this little circle here, it's like a little washer. You're going to take it and push it all the way down and then it clamps it onto it. If you don't have a bodkin, you take the safety pin, unclick it, go ahead, stick it through the elastic, and there you go. You're all ready to stick it through the casing. The bodkin's just a little easier because it's a little bigger and easier to hold on to. So we want to put our elastic in this little casing we created and we want to put it in going the direction that our seam allowance is, so that way when we get over here to the seam, it's going to glide right over it. So since my seam allowance is going this way, I'm going to take my elastic and push it through in this direction. Now you're going to push it through and pull it. Push it and pull it. So we're just gonna go through this motion until we get to the other side. Make sure you don't lose your elastic in it because your elastic is going to be smaller than your skirt. Also, make sure your elastic doesn't twist while you're pushing it and pulling it through. Once you get to the other end, go ahead, pull your elastic out, unclip your bodkin or your safety pin. And now what you want to do is overlap your elastic about 1/2 inch, and then you can either zigzag back and forth or you can use a straight stitch and go back and forth on your elastic. Make sure that it's just overlapping flat and that you're not trying to sew it together like a seam. So let's go sew that elastic together. It's almost done. I'm going to be using the zigzag stitch. Working my way to the bottom, back stitching and coming all the way back up. And cut. So now we have our elastic waist sewn up and it is not going anywhere. And the good thing about this, if it's hard to get into your machine, doesn't matter what it looks like because it's going to be covered by the casing for the waist. So now we can pull out our skirt waist, stretch the fabric over the elastic. And when you're doing this, make sure it's not twisted because right now would be the time to untwist it if it is. And so now what we need to do is go back and sew up this little opening that we still have. So let's sew it up. Make sure you're starting right where your other stitches are. Do a back stitch or a fix and just follow that little opening that you need to close. Overlap your stitches by a few stitches when you get to the other end. Back stitch or fix and cut. So we have that little opening sewn up and our waistband is completely done. So this is the inside of it, and then when I flip it right side out, woo, we can see how nice the top of that waistband looks, and you can see that our elastic is roughly the width of that casing we made. It's not floating around in a big open space, and it's not too tight. If it was too tight, the elastic would be buckling and folding in half. So we have one step left, and that's hemming the bottom. So we are going to be creating a single fold hem, which means we are just folding the piece of fabric up one time. So you could fold this up 1/2 inch because that's what we left for the seam allowance, but maybe you left 1 inch for your seam allowance, maybe you left 1/4 inch. So a single fold hem can be any width folded up, but since we left 1/2 inch for the seam allowance, we're going to be folding it up 1/2 inch and then stitching right next to the serge there. So let's sew up that hem and try on the skirt. Don't forget to back stitch or fix and work your way all the way around the hem. Once you make it all the way around the hem and you get back to where you started, just overlap a few of your stitches and then back stitch and cut. We did it! We finished our super cute elastic banded skirt, and it was so simple, wasn't it? It was so easy. So let's go over exactly what we did and try it on. So we turned that big rectangle into the super cute skirt. How awesome is that? So we have our beautiful finished edges, we have our seam at center back here, and then we have our elastic band at the top where we created that casing and we put the elastic right into it. And that's it. So easy. Here it is. Here is our gathered skirt. And remember, you can make this any length you want, and you can make it super poofy and gathered if you want. I chose to keep it a little bit narrower for this one. This skirt turned out so cute, and it was so easy to make. We have this beautiful finished hem with that serge and that single folded hem. We have our elastic waist. And these are so easy to make that you could make one for every day of the week. No matter what your skill level is at sewing, I know you can make this gathered skirt. Thanks so much for watching Sewing Anastasia today. If you have any questions on making this super simple gathered skirt, leave it down below and I will get back with you as soon as I can. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, give it some applause, and leave that comment down below. It helps my videos and it helps everybody see Sewing Anastasia. And if you'd like to share Sewing Anastasia with your friends and family, I would love that so much. So make sure you subscribe to Sewing Anastasia and hit that notification bell so you know when all the new videos come out every single week. So much sewing content. And make sure you follow me on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok because I put out sewing content every single day on one of those platforms. So we are just sewing up a storm over here. And don't forget, I now teach sewing classes in my design studio in Chicago, Illinois, and virtually, and you can check those out at sewinganastasia.com. Thank you so much for watching. Bye!